I hope you guys have enjoyed the series that we've been doing for the month of July where we got to hear from all of our Rise Church pastors. And yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's been cool hearing the different passages of Scripture that they've all chosen to teach to us. And I get to bring up the end here. This is the last week of this series. Let me ask you a question. It's okay to participate a little bit. Online, too. You can type your answer in if you want. What do you love to do? Go to church. Okay, good. Drink coffee. You're my person. Read a good book. Love it. Watch football. All right. Go fishing. Shop. Play golf. All right. So there's some good things there. Fun things. And I know that some of you thought of things, but you didn't say it out loud. But what I want to point out as we get into this is no matter what you thought of, no matter what you blurted out, no matter how much you enjoy that thing, whatever it was that came in your mind, those are great things, but there's something that God says is far more important. There's something that God says is actually absolutely critical, and He cares about it more than almost anything else. And the thing that He cares about is the condition of your heart. We're going to talk about that today. I don't know if you know this, but you have a heart condition. And I have a heart condition. And the question we're asking today is, what is the condition of your heart? It's a hard question to answer. I hope by the end of today you'll have a little bit clearer picture of how to answer it. And maybe you're here today and you feel like, you know what, man, like I don't really have much concern about my heart. That's okay. We're glad you're here. But God does care about your heart, whether you do or not. In Proverbs 4, the book of wisdom, it says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." Keep your heart with all vigilance. That means it's serious. That means it's intense. That means that keeping your heart is a very important task that we all need to pay attention to. And obviously, this verse I just read, it's referring to the spiritual heart, right? Not the physical heart. But there are similarities between the physical heart and the spiritual heart that I think we need to talk about because they matter. They're too obvious to ignore. With the physical heart, you can't see my physical heart right now, but you know that it's in there because otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you. You know that my heart is beating inside because I'm alive and I'm awake and I'm speaking and I'm moving, and so you know that it's doing what it's meant to do inside of me. You can't see it, but you know that it's essential. You know that I can't live without it. I know you can't see the actual physical heart, but maybe you have a picture of what that physical heart looks like because maybe you've watched the Health Channel or you remember the pictures from a science book when you were younger or whatever, but you've seen maybe pictures of an actual physical heart. And so you know that every person in this room right now, I hope, they have a physical heart and it's beating. It's alive, we're moving, and you can't live without it. I don't know if I'm sure you know this, but you can live without limbs. I remember the story years ago. It was all over the news. Some of you probably remember it. There was a hiker, and he was out by himself up in the mountains, and a tree fell on his leg, and he was stuck, and he was trapped, and he would have died out there because he couldn't free himself, and so he had to use whatever he had with him to remove his own leg, and he did. And he's still alive today. That's intense, but it shows you that you can live without a leg. I was reading about this kind of thing earlier this week, and I found out that last year there was a high school wrestler over on the East Coast that only has one arm, and he went to the championships. That's amazing to me. But it just shows you can live without an arm. You can live, an arm, trivial. A leg, it's a nice perk to have. But a heart, you have to have a heart. You can't survive without a heart. Now, for your physical heart, those of us who've experienced some level of heart disease, or we have a loved one that's maybe experienced a heart disease, you know that there's symptoms that come with that. When there's an unhealthy heart, there's symptoms that go along with that. Shortness of breath. There can be a numbness or a tingling. There can be receding hairline, I read, was a sign of an unhealthy heart. Not that everybody with a receding hairline has a bad heart. I'm throwing that out there, but that is one of the symptoms, it said. Indigestion, lack of energy, tightness in the chest. Signs that there's something wrong with the heart. And if you have one of these symptoms, what do? You go to the doctor. Doctor says, well, we need to lower your cholesterol, or we need to do this, or you need to eat better, or exercise, or whatever, and they look at your blood under the microscope, and they give suggestions. You've got your physical heart, right? But what this is talking about today, this is talking about your spiritual heart. And that's a very different thing. The Bible talks a lot about this. We don't even have time today to read every part where it talks about your spiritual heart. You could describe your spiritual heart almost like a house. Several of our pastors over the last few weeks referred to the fact that there is no temple anymore. We are the temple. That's what Jesus came to say. Now we're the temple, and the Holy Spirit resides in us. We no longer go to a place to meet with God, but the Spirit lives within those who follow Jesus. We are the temple. And it's a beautiful thing, but it kind of describes that heart as a house. And there's times where we let things live in our house. There's things that come into our heart when we open the door and they live in there and they do damage. And I know when we invite Jesus into our heart, when we surrender ourselves to Jesus Christ, it says he gives us a new heart, and that's true. He gives us a new heart, but at the same time, we still can open the door and let some damaging things into that heart that make it unhealthy or put up barriers between us and other people or us and God. And the things that are in our heart, here's what you'll find time and time again, they always come out. They always make their way out. They make their way out in the things that we do. They make their way out in the things that we say. If you were to say something hurtful to somebody, you don't actually have a word problem or a speaking problem. You have a heart problem, because that's where it came from. That's where the root was. If you do something that hurts somebody or offends somebody, a harmful behavior, it's not a behavior problem that you have. It's a heart problem. That's where it flowed from. That's the source. The heart exposes itself all the time. And in my years as a pastor, I think one of the things I've become pretty good at is watching people's hearts. And I feel like I can see when somebody has some damage in their heart. I can see when something's broken. I can see when there's something unhealthy in there and kind of pinpoint even where it might have come from. And the real reason that I've become pretty good at this, though, is because I've had to do it with my own heart. And I've had to find the poison I've let into my heart. I've had to find the unhealthy parts of my heart and actually figure out a way to get rid of those things. We all know the symptoms of an unhealthy heart. Things like arrogance, right? Boastfulness, a short fuse, impatience. I could keep going until I hit yours. Defensiveness. Self-centeredness is a sign of an unhealthy heart. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody that no matter how many conversations you have with them, the conversation always revolves around them and never veers off to any other topics or anybody else? That's a sign of something unhealthy inside that heart. But the results, the symptoms of a damaged heart or an unhealthy heart, spiritual heart, it's not shortness of breath, it's shortness of love. It's not a numb, tingling effect, but it's a numbness to maybe the love of God that he's offering to you freely, but you just ignore it and choose to be numb to it because of things that have happened in your past. It might not be lack of energy, but it might be lack of passion for continuing to live your life in the way that Jesus says to, which is always harder. And here's the thing about the symptoms, and we try to disguise them. We try to make sure that our words don't slip out. We try to make sure that our behaviors don't come out in the way that show that we have an unhealthy heart, but we always slip up. And we hide things, and we don't really acknowledge or want God to do heart surgery and clean the inside of the house because, well, that doesn't always feel good. That's hard. And here's the truth about hiding the symptoms of your unhealthy heart. You can fool people for a little while, but you can't fool yourself. And you certainly can't fool God. He knows every inch of your heart. And to be honest with you, you can't really fool other people for that long either, because what's in your heart always eventually comes out. It always comes to the surface in your behaviors and your words, and it always ends up coming out. And, you know, the thing about hiding is we hide it long enough, and then when it comes out, the people that it actually hurts the most are those closest to us. And it just spills out of our heart, much like the cup of coffee that 2 days ago I left on the roof of my car and drove off, and it spilled all over, and there's still a brown spot on the top of my car. I haven't cleaned it yet. It's the same with your heart. When you don't pay attention to where you're placing it and what is happening inside of it and what symptoms it's starting to show and whether it's healthy or not, sometimes you just drive off in this direction and it spills all over the place and everybody can see it but you. And we hide because we don't want to have to clean house, but people close to us get burned by our heart. I'll tell you when mine spills out the most and hurts people dear to me, it's when I'm under a lot of pressure. That's just me. It's different for everybody. For me, whenever I'm under a lot of pressure, or I'm stressed, or I have a ton on my plate and I don't know how I'm going to get it all done, that's when things start to come out of me in my behaviors and in my words and in my reactions that hurt those dearest to me. It's not that my behaviors were bad and that's all there was to it. It's that, no, that was already in my heart, and I need to dig that out and figure out why did that cause that symptom. You know, this thing happens sometimes. I've gotten better. I've gotten more mature, but I'm about to confess my sins to you. So this thing happens where when I leave the house in the morning, I'm generally a pretty happy guy. I I get dressed, I kiss my wife goodbye, the kids are great, I love my kids, and then I feel blessed, so I leave the house, and I get in the car, and I see the neighbor, and we have great neighbors, so we wave on the way out, and it's great. I feel like Mr. Rogers. But then on the way to work, I get to Demery. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know what it is. It's like Acres, Linwood, Chenoweth, fine. Demery, the crazies are there, on my way to work at least. And so I'm driving a little over the speed limit, as I often do. Not too much, but just a tiny bit, because I like to not annoy people behind me. And this guy behind me is definitely annoyed. And like he's so close to my back bumper as we're driving that if I were to slam on the brakes or even touch them, he would probably hit me and cause an accident. He's so close to me that I can look in the rearview mirror and see every zit on his face. It's that clear. He's that close to me. And you can tell the look in his eyes that I can see that he's upset that he can't get around me and he just wants to ride up against me. And so then we come to a light, and I kind of look in the rearview mirror, and I'm trying to have a good attitude, and I'm trying to not let what's in my heart come out. But it's in there, and so it's probably going to come out eventually. And so I said, well, if he thinks I'm driving slow, which I'm not, now I'm going to go real slow. So now I go through the intersection as slow as I possibly can, and now he's kind of banging on the wheel, and he's getting really upset. And he does that thing that a lot of drivers behind you do where he kind of goes over the line a little bit just to signal to you that I'm annoyed I can't pass you. But then he veers around me, and he definitely gave me the universal sign for you're number one. And I know that my reaction was immature, and it showed what was in my heart. But after it was over, this is how far I've come, I kind of laughed. And I thought about it, and then in light of what we're talking about today, I asked myself, what was in my heart that caused that to happen? Like, why did that come out of me, and what is damaged in here? Because, and the truth is, and I know this is true for me, one of my issues in the past has been anger, and so there's anger plaque in my arteries. And it comes out sometimes in situations like that. I mean, am I alone? Am I the only one, or can you relate to this? So what I want to do is I want to take a look at what Jesus said about our hearts. My passage is from Matthew chapter 15. I'll read a few sections of it. And Jesus is talking to some religious leaders here. He's talking to the Pharisees. And here's what it says, verse 1. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Now, that sounds like a weird thing to care about. Let me kind of give you a little context here. First of all, this is not an unusual position for Jesus to be in. Jesus was constantly, by the religious leaders of that day, being painted into the corner and called on stuff. And he was saying things like, I am God in the flesh, and he was hinting at things of who he actually was and things like that. And they didn't like the things that he was saying or who he was becoming, right? And so they tried to get him to say the wrong thing. They tried to point out that he was breaking God's law, but Jesus didn't fall for it. Jesus didn't break God's law. Jesus simply, in this moment, wasn't following human traditions that had been added to God's law. That's what's actually happening here, and I'll explain this in a minute. Some religious leaders had taken a law that God actually spoke and kind of twisted it or demented it in ways where they created these human traditions, like we often do in the church, and they thought, well, we'll have this tradition, and if you don't break this tradition, you won't break the law, so we need this tradition. Let me give you a couple examples of how this plays out in some churches. When I was younger, I had a pastor tell me, you know what, Jarrod, Christians don't play cards. I said, what? I'm sorry? I said, why don't Christians play cards? He said, because it leads to gambling. And I'm thinking, like, go fish? Like, evil. Crazy, like, don't even get me started on Uno, like, and it's like, this is ridiculous how far some of us go to add a human element to some things that God may have actually said. And I've been to churches where they say dancing in all forms is wrong because it leads to sex. And, you see what I'm saying, though? For centuries, Christians have added human traditions and elements to what God actually said, thinking that they're preventing God's law from being broken, but they often take it way too far where it becomes ridiculous, and that's kind of what Jesus is addressing here. So these religious leaders are what we might call in modern day legalists, and they're practicing legalism in a way. And this is probably more than you want to know about this particular situation, but I'm going to give you all the context. We do that around here. The law was something God spoke many, many years before these men even walked the earth in the Old Testament, where they said to the priests, and they were talking to the priests, you need to be ceremonially clean. Okay? When you come into my presence, I want you to be ceremonially clean, which means I want you to wash your hands from your fingertips to your elbows so you don't put anything unclean in your mouth and defile yourself. So that's what God had said to these priests. But then these people said, well, if it's good for the priests, it's good for everybody, so let's have everybody do this. And Jesus said, I know what happened. I get the little picture, but you're not getting the big picture. You're missing the forest because you're focused on the tree. This law from God wasn't even originally about dirt. It was about the heart not being defiled. And Jesus knows this of all people. So then in verse 17, Jesus says, don't you see that whatever enters your mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? In other words, it doesn't matter as much as you think it matters, guys. And that's kind of a strange verse. Jesus is saying, let's just get to the bottom line. Let's do some basic stuff. If you eat something, guys, your body's going to eliminate it. And there's a big potential here for humor that I'm not going to stoop to because I'm mature and I have self-control. But verse 18, he says, the things that come out of a person's mouth comes from the heart. These defile them. So he's saying what you're saying defiles people doesn't actually defile people. The words that come out of your mouth defile you. He's saying what comes out of your mouth marks you. In the spiritual sense, what comes out of your mouth originates in your heart. So Jesus is saying to them, let me kind of summarize this big picture for you. God's not as concerned about what you eat as what comes out of your mouth. So let's pay attention to the things that God really cares about. Words that come out of your mouth are hurtful to others. They hurt God. They alienate you from other people and from God. Jesus says, let's get back to the big picture. Our words actually reflect the condition of our heart. And we say things all the time. I'm sorry if you say that and this is offensive, but we say things like, I didn't mean to say that. Yeah, you did. Because it didn't come out if there wasn't a trace of it in your heart. The truth is we did mean to say it in some sense, and the truth is it was in there. It just slipped out. And sometimes we're unguarded or we're caught off guard, and we say, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I just said. But God can. Because he sees what's in there that caused that to come out, even sometimes when we don't have control over all of it. It was there all along. It's just that most of us have become very professional at hiding what's actually in our heart and putting on a mask. And in the unguarded moments of our life, when our heart is actually revealed and our heart comes out and says, hey, world, this is what I actually look like. Verse 19. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, Jesus says. And then he lists some. Murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person. But eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. So Jesus is correcting them. And some of you are looking at that list I just read, and you're thinking, ooh, those are the big ones. I don't do those. But you know what? Murder comes from hatred that is stored in a heart. Sexual impurity comes from lust that is behind that door of our heart. Theft comes from greed that lives in our heart, right? Lying comes from deception that is stored inside our heart. Slander comes from jealousy that is stored inside our heart. Our actions reflect the condition of our heart. If you're taking notes, write this down. There's two things. Our words and our actions reflect the condition of our heart. And if you want to know if somebody's heart is healthy or unhealthy, look at their words and their actions because it's very telling about what's inside there. What I've experienced in the church over the years, more times than I thought I would actually, is sometimes some parents will come to the church for the first time, and you can tell that they're not really, into it. They're not really going to be part of a church family, for example, but they're bringing their kids because they see some issues in their kids, and they feel like the church can fix it. And so they bring their kids, and they put them in the youth group, or they bring them on Sunday, and it's like, fix him. And what they mean is change his actions. His behaviors need to change, and I've tried so hard, and I can't figure it out. I want him baptized, sanctified, dry cleaned, and then you can give him back when he's 18. And that'll fix him. You fix him, almighty Pastor Nathan, right? And it's like, what I want to say sometimes when that's the thing with parents is like, it's not a symptom issue, it's a heart issue. The symptom is that your kid is a liar. The symptom is that your kid is on drugs. The symptom is this or that. But there's a heart issue that you're not figuring out and we're not getting to the bottom of. There's something unhealthy in there that's what we need to get. It's a heart disease. These are merely symptoms of a heart that for some reason, and we can pinpoint it, is rebelling against God in these ways. But in our world, when we look at behaviors and words as the answer to morality, we've missed the bigger picture. When we say, oh, don't do that, don't say that, and that's all we focus on, especially in the church, we have missed the big picture that Jesus is trying to share. We're too concerned about washing hands, and God's saying, no, I want the heart. If I get the heart, the rest of the stuff will come. If you just fix the behaviors and the words coming out of people's mouths and you don't go after the heart, they're going to continue to come out. It's not fixing the source of the problem. I want your heart. We'll deal with the behavior later. It's damaging when so many of us as Christians focus on the behaviors and the actions of those outside of Christianity before winning their hearts. The heart has to come first, guys. If you weren't following Jesus, you wouldn't do all the actions either. That has to come first. And I know there's people probably in this room, and I know you might know some people, friends. I have close family members who don't know God yet, and they haven't surrendered to Jesus yet, those outside of Christianity. And I've heard people say, you know what, man, I'm glad you got that, Jarrod, but that Christianity thing doesn't work for everybody. I've heard people say, I've tried Christianity, it didn't work for me. I've tried church, it didn't work for me. And I say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what didn't work? Well, I did all the things. I stopped doing this, and I stopped doing that, and I went to the class, and I joined the group, and I did this, and I did that. And you know what we've done when we do that is we've created this whole ceremonial hand-washing thing that if I clean up my outside and I do the right things that I've been told to do, if I learn a few things, I'll get closer to God. It's like we're treating God as this glorified etiquette instructor instead of the one who wants to pursue and win our hearts from the inside out. That's where it begins. And he says it time and time again. I'm not just speaking this. This is from the Word of God. The reason that it doesn't work, by the way, is that God never promised that method would work for anybody. He said, give me your heart first. He said, let me go after the heart first. God never said clean up the outside first. It's not in there. You can't find it. He said, let me go after the heart, and then we'll start to see the outside become clean. This is going to surprise some of you because I know we have a lot of people that maybe grew up in the church but then maybe kind of stopped reading the Bible when they reached adulthood. Because Jesus is often taught very differently to children than he is to adults, right? Did you know that there's multiple situations in here where Jesus got angry? Did you guys know that? I know that throws off some of your worldview because you think he's just a guy that holds little lambs and pets them and frolics in the lilies and all that. But that's not an accurate definition of Jesus. And so Jesus got angry sometimes, and there's documentation in here of it. And by the way, do you know who Jesus got angry at? He got angry at those who tried to look religious on the outside, but they were actually dead on the inside. Those who tried to put their influence on others by doing all the right things, checking all the right boxes, and saying they were the godly ones when the heart wasn't in it. And the heart wasn't actually surrendered to God. Jesus, I've been reading the Gospels lately, and I've read them a couple times through because I just think that's one of the best things we can ever do as followers of Jesus is read the Gospels again and again and again. And one theme I've noticed recently, because every time I read them I get something different, which is beautiful about the Gospels, but one thing I noticed recently is in all four Gospels, all the way through, Jesus had unbelievable grace and compassion and love for those who were doing it wrong but didn't know it yet. And he did not have a lot of tolerance for those who did know and claimed to follow him and didn't have the right heart. I find that convicting. Because what do so many of us Christians do that's so opposite of how Jesus did it? We talk to people who don't even know God yet about needing to do this and needing to do that, and you're wrong and you're right and all this stuff. No, Jesus had grace and compassion for those because you have to go after the heart first. The ones that he was most angry at were the religious people who acted like they were doing it right, but their heart wasn't in it. I'm going to paraphrase this. I read 6 different translations of this particular verse, and they're all pretty much the same, but I liked this paraphrase version because I think it's interesting. But it's from Matthew 23, and in any translation you read it, you can see the disappointment in Jesus as he's talking to these religious leaders. And here's what he basically says. He says, you guys are hopeless. You're religious scholars. You're Pharisees. You know the word. You burnish the surface of your cups and bowls so they sparkle in the sun while the insides are maggoty with your greed and gluttony. He says, scour the insides first, and then the gleaming surface will actually mean something. He goes on with some intense words. You're like manicured grave plots. You look nice, but you're dead inside. Grass clipped, flowers bright, but if you dig down 6 feet, it's all rotten bones and worm-eaten flesh. Dang, that's not the same Jesus I learned about in Sunday school. But he did it with these people, and he said, you look good on the outside, but you're dead on the inside. Can I be really honest with you for just a minute? And I mean so honest that some of you are going to be bothered. But that's okay, because it's about being honest, right? For the last couple of years, if I'm being really honest with you, from like 2020 to now, I've been really tempted to write a book called People That Need to Be Slapped. And here's the thing. It's all about Christians. I love Christians. We're set apart. We're adopted into God's family. We need to have unity and support each other and do all the one another's that the Scripture says and be one. And I'm not talking about all Christians, so don't leave yet. I think that if you're offended by a statement like that I just made, I think that's part of the problem. Because I think that we in the church need to actually take a statement like that and say, maybe we do need to look inwardly. Maybe we do need to decide, how are we presenting ourselves to the world? Is it how Jesus said to, or is it opposite of that? Are we doing things under the banner of Jesus Christ that he never put under his banner, but saying that it's his thing? By the way, Jesus wrote the first chapter right here. For me, chapter 2 would be Christians who stand on the street corner with a bullhorn and picket signs. I just don't think that's effective at all to win people's hearts. Chapter 3 would be those of you who dress your pets up in clothes. just saying. Sorry. Chapter 4 would be Christians who forward me everyday little email poems. Sorry. Chapter 5 is the Christians who post things on Facebook that start with, if you don't repost this, are you a real Christian? Stop doing that. Chapter 6, Christians who format their gossip like prayer. Oh, girl, did you hear what happened to Jessica? We need to pray for her. Let me tell you all the details. And some of us wonder why the lost, dying, and hurting world sometimes doesn't want to be a part of this. But you look at this and you say, why was Jesus so into this? Why was this such a big deal? And I'll tell you why. It's because Jesus knew the heart was everything. He knew that everything else flows from it. That without a clean spiritual heart, it's going to wreak havoc on your relationships with other people, with God. You're going to hurt those closest to you that mean the most to you. That's why your heart is such a big deal. You know, the great consequence of a diseased spiritual heart, if you have one, is this. You'll never have intimacy with other people or with God the way that he designed you to if your arteries are clogged. And so I know some of you are saying, man, this is the most encouraging message. I'm so glad I came today. Is there any hope for my heart? Yes. And I'm going to share really good news with you for the rest of my time right now. But first, let me tell you the bad news. The bad news is you cannot fix your heart on your own. And there's not another person who can fix it either. A lot of times we try to fix our own heart, or we turn to somebody who we think can fix our heart, and that's not how God designed us. He is the only one that can do the impossible, and trust me, it is impossible for your heart to be fixed. He's the one that can do it. He's a master at it. It's what he does. It's his purpose in life. So that's the bad news. You can't do it yourself. But here's the good news. Do you know what God is all about? Do you know what Christianity is all about? Changing hearts. Going into the deepest, darkest, most painful, most broken places and redeeming them to that which they were always intended to be. It's one of the big things Jesus came to do. God says in so many places in his word, I'll give you a new heart. I'll remove the old one. I'll put a new one in. It'll be shiny and new. It'll come with the right desires. And so those of you who are here, you say, well, I already have a relationship with God, Jarrod. I've already given my life to Jesus Christ, so he's already given me a new heart. Yeah, but you still open the door and let disease in. And it creates barriers. So this message is for all of us. And there's things that clog the heart. Here's some biggies, and I chose these because I struggle with all 4 of these. I think they're the big ones. There's obviously more, but I can only fit 4 into this message because we're limited on time and we have some baptisms to get to. So this is what it's all about. 4 of the things that I think we let into our heart that cause us to have an unhealthy heart: guilt, greed, anger, jealousy. I'm going to talk about those for just a few minutes, and then we'll land the plane, okay? So let's talk about guilt first. Guilt says, I owe you. If I have guilt in my heart, it sounds like I owe you. I've wronged you. I've done something that offended you. I've hurt you in some way. I've spoken behind your back. I've tarnished your reputation. I've offended you. I stole from you. I lied to you. I've done something wrong to you, and I feel guilty. I owe you. I owe you an apology. I owe you to make it right. I owe you, and here's the thing. On one level, we know we've done something wrong, and we owe a debt, and we want to make it right. But on the other level, we just want to hide it, and we want to bury it, and we want to stuff it down and rationalize it away. But when I owe you something, the problem is there is a barrier between you and I. Like, let's say that we're neighbors, and I walk outside one day, and, I don't know, I kick your cat, accidentally. And then the next day, I come up to you, and I say, hey, how's it going, neighbor? You're not going to respond in the same way. There's going to be tension. You're not going to come up to me and say, hey, nice left foot yesterday, Jarrod. No, you're going to have a problem with me. I owe you something, an apology, a new cat, whatever it might be. I know this is a stupid analogy, but it gets the point across. Until I give you what I owe you, there's a tension there. There's something between us. There's a barrier between me and God in some ways. And this is a biblical principle, by the way. It says multiple times in here, I can't be right with God if I'm wrong with the people. There's even a part where it says, before you come in and offer me your worship, go make it right with your brother and sister if there's something between you. I don't want your worship until you do that first. How many of us follow that one? Man, that's hard. I owe you. Proverbs 14, fools mock at the guilt offering, but the upright enjoy acceptance of it. If you're taking notes, circle the word fools. That's going to be a common theme here. Okay, let's talk about anger. Anger says, you owe me. That's kind of the opposite. You owe me. You owe me. You hurt me. You angered me. You stole from me. You messed up my life. You hurt my reputation. You broke up my relationship. You made fun of me. Whatever it is, you owe me. You owe me an apology. You owe me money. You owe me my reputation back. And I'm going to hold this anger debt inside my heart until you pay me back, because it's a debt. And I'm going to walk around my life with this in my heart, with the door shut, and every once in a while, I'm going to bring it out and tell somebody about it, because I want to hear them say, oh, I'm so sorry that he did that to you, and make me feel better, but it's in there, and I'm not letting it out, and it's causing my heart to be more and more unhealthy as the years go by, because it's living inside there. It's going to grow even bigger and invade my spiritual house more and more, and then I'm going to realize eventually anger is separating me from people, it's separating me from God. And God, by the way, says to me, Jarrod, I came to forgive you. And do you know how many sins you've committed? And I came to forgive yours, past, present, and future. And might I remind you what I did to forgive it? And all I'm asking you to do is unclog your heart, your hard, distant heart. But it's hard to do. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Greed. Greed says, I'll explain this, I owe me. I owe me everything I've earned. I owe me everything he's earned and she's earned, because I want it all. I need to earn everything that I feel I need to earn. I owe me. People who are closest to me are probably going to feel like they're not a priority in my life. They're secondary to earning money, or they're secondary to my stuff, maybe. And we justify it sometimes by saying, well, I grew up poor. I don't want my family to be poor, so I'm going to work and never see them, or whatever it might be. But the problem with greed, guys, is it's ravenous. There's a quote by Rockefeller where someone asked him, how much is enough? One of the richest men in the world at that time. How much is enough? And he said, just a little more. That's greed. And if you're sitting here today and you have greed in your heart, I think really the root of it is fear. For most people. Not for everybody, but for most people. I think for most people it's a fear. It's I'm afraid of not having enough. I'm afraid of going back to that place where I struggled. I'm afraid that God's not going to provide for me. I could go down the list. I think it's rooted in fear. And I think the other issue with greed is that we don't like to see that or admit that one in us. Like, it's easy for me to say I have anger issues or I have jealousy problems sometimes, but I don't want to say I'm greedy. I want to say I'm just smart. I'm thrifty. I'm careful. I don't want to call myself a hoarder. I want to call myself intelligent with my money, And if you want to know if it's actually greed or if it's not, the best thing you could do is ask the people closest to you and see if they feel like a priority in your life. Here's what Jesus said in Luke 12. A person who is a fool to store up earthly wealth but not have a rich relationship with God. Doesn't say not to store up earthly wealth. I want to point that out. It says a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth but not have a rich relationship with God. Okay? Don't miss that part. And then jealousy. Jealousy is another thing that clogs our spiritual heart. Jealousy says this. It says, God owes me. Right? He owes me better health. I don't understand why that person's healthy and I'm not. He owes that to me. God owes me that I should be able to look like that person instead of what I look like because I don't want to look this way. God gave that person more than he gave me. He blessed that person in a different way, and I want to be blessed in that way, and he's not blessing me that way. And jealousy, gives birth to comparison. And you take it with you wherever you go, and you're always comparing yourself to other people, and social media hasn't helped us at all in this department. And then you make this list of these types of people that you don't like because every time you see them, it reminds you of who you're not that they are or what they have that you don't have, and you don't like to feel those feelings, and so you avoid them. By the way, one of the telltale signs that we have jealousy in our heart is if there's somebody who we've kind of been jealous of in the past, maybe just a little bit, and then something hard happens to them, and we kind of get excited about it inside. Like, oh man, that person got the promotion that I wanted. That was supposed to go to me, and then they get fired a year later, and you're like, that's a sign of jealousy. Man, the neighbor down the street really, I've been wanting that exact car for years. And he just got it, and I'm so far away from being able to get that car. I don't know if I'll ever get it. He just got it, man. It's jealousy. He gets a scratch on it or a bird poops on it. You get excited about it. Jealousy. And by the way, jealousy is not really that you're mad at that person. It's that you're mad at God because that person has been given something that you haven't been given. Because God owes you. And as long as you're comparing and criticizing and jealous of others, then you don't look up and connect with God and express your true gratitude for all that he has given you, which is a lot. You're just not seeing it. 2 Corinthians 10 says, we don't compare ourselves with those who think so much of themselves, but they are foolish to compare themselves with themselves. See that theme again. So guilt, anger, greed, jealousy in our hearts. These are killers of our heart. A better word would be cloggers because they prevent the heart from flowing out what it's supposed to flow out. And I'll be honest with you, I have struggled with all four of those. And some of you might hear me say that and think, well, you've struggled with all of those, Jarrod? You're a loser. No, it says I'm a fool. Don't call me a loser. I'm a fool. It says I'm a fool. I'm a fool when I allow those things to take up residence in my heart. Little story about me. I used to let all of these live in my heart. And they were all living in my spiritual house until one day I finally realized, like many in this room, I will not clean this house up on my own. And I asked Jesus to come and clean it up and just give me a new heart and to start to spruce it up how it's always meant to be. And I started to do some things that he clearly tells me to do. And now I can honestly say to you that those four things don't live in my heart anymore. Now, a couple of them are still neighbors. They're nearby, and sometimes I even open up the door and let them in my living room. But they don't live in here anymore. And that's progress. That's growth. And I'm proud of that. I'll take that. I'm going to keep going, but that's a good first step. It's called spiritual growth when they don't live there. So here's the practical part, and then we'll be done. How do you not let these things into your heart? How do you boot them out? And the answer is you need some hired muscle. But you can't hire the muscle, so you need to exercise a little bit. I'm going to use exercise as a metaphor because it just makes sense to me. Let's talk about exercise. Exercise is a great metaphor for this because it doesn't offer a quick fix. It's not fun to do, but it leads to a healthy life. The reality is nobody really loves to exercise. When I asked that question at the beginning of the message, none of you said, run. That's what I like to do for fun. Push-ups, that's what I love to do for fun. No, you said eat. travel, nap, read. There was no mention of exercise. Exercise doesn't come natural. But on a spiritual level, here's what actually happens. If you don't do some of these exercises that God's word lays out, some things in your life are never going to actually change. Because he will come in and change your heart, but there's some things that you have to do also that are going to help you make that heart stronger. Some relationships, if you don't do the exercises, will never be healed. Some broken, painful places in your heart will never feel better if you don't do some of these exercises. There will always be a barrier or something where there's just something really unhealthy there and it starts to spill out. So these exercises are simple. I'm going to go through them really fast. And you probably even already know these, but it's good to be reminded of them. So what is the exercise we need to do if we struggle with guilt? Confess. Confessing is the answer. Psalm 32 says, "Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity." I stopped hiding it. I said, "I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin." Okay, confess to God, and then you confess to others. Confessing, by the way, this is the best picture I've ever heard. It's like you have a backpack on, and you're carrying all this guilt because you don't tell anybody about it or share what you've done wrong with anybody. You just carry it in this backpack. And you can see people sometimes who carry guilt for decades, and it physically actually takes a toll on them, and you can see sometimes it starts to look that way even physically because they're carrying all this guilt because they never open up and talk about it with anybody. So confessing to God for healing and confessing to others for that relief, it's like if I call my brother Danny up here and I say, "I confess, this is what I did wrong, man, this is the stuff that I'm feeling guilty about," and I tell him all about it, it's like I'm taking that backpack up and putting it on him, and I'm like, oh, I feel so much lighter. And we're meant to carry those burdens for each other. James 5:16, "Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed." Circle that word, healed. You want to be healed? It says how right there. What's the exercise to unclog the anger artery? You got to forgive. And this is one of the hardest ones to do, guys. I told you these are simple. Simple to write down, simple to remember, hard to do. Colossians 3:13. "Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others." Now, logically, when I read that, that makes a lot of sense to me, but spiritually, it's very tough to do, okay? How often do you forgive, by the way? 7 times? Somebody asked Jesus. He said, no, 7 times 70. Again and again and again, day after day after day. It's a hard one. What about the exercise to unclog greed? Give. It's the answer. Luke 12, "Instead, seek his kingdom." That's your top priority. Not earthly things, his kingdom. "And these things will be added to you." He says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." To give you the kingdom, guys, which is so much more than any earthly possession. He says, "Sell your possessions, give to the needy, provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys." Where no market can drop out of the bottom of it, no real estate crash can affect it, because these are the things that last into eternity, and they're stored up in heaven. What about the exercise for the last one, jealousy? The exercise is to celebrate. Celebrate. Celebrate the differences in others. Celebrate when someone's not like you. Celebrate when something good happens to somebody else. Celebrate when somebody gets something that you wish you had. That's the cure. That's the exercise for jealousy. It's the antidote. It's the medicine. Celebrate God's good works. Find something in your life to celebrate. Now, here's the thing. Some of you will look at these things I just shared, and you're going to respond like this. Those are good. God, make me a confessor. God, make me a celebrator. God, make me generous. God, make me a forgiver. And I'm going to say something that might bother some of you. I think that's inconsistent with what God's word says. It's not as simple as just praying and asking God to make you something. He gives you some exercises to do. He gives you his way of doing it. And then he says, I'll come in and do the impossible and give you a new heart. But there's some things I'm asking you to do to help me along the way. Let me give you an illustration of this to help you get it. Let's say you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, I'm sorry, Jarrod, you have a bad heart. And I say, well, give me a new heart. And he says, well, that's not how it works. You need to go exercise. And I say, well, I have a bad heart. Give me the good heart, and then I'll go exercise. And he says, no, you're not listening. That's not how it works. You need to go exercise. And I said, I don't want to exercise. It doesn't come natural to me. It's hard. It doesn't feel good. I don't look good in workout clothes. I ride my bike once a week, but it's always to Scotty's Donuts. Like like whatever it is for you, this isn't how, and the doctor says, no, you don't understand. You start exercising whether you like it or not, whether it's natural to you or not, whether it feels right or not. You start exercising, and then over time, your heart's going to get better. I'm going to do some things for you along the way and prescribe some things and show you some wins, and I'm going to start to do the impossible work inside that only I can do because I'm the trained professional. But there's some exercises you need to do along the way so we can get there. You have to start that in that place. We do the same thing with God. We argue with him in the same way. We say, God, I'm greedy, make me a giver. And he says, okay, give more. See the blessing of being generous. It'll start to grow on you. You say, God, make me a celebrator. He says, okay, walk down to that guy down the street that got the car you wanted, stick your head in the window and go, hey, this smells nice, man. Can I have a ride? Want me to help you clean the poop off the top? Celebrate a win that somebody else has. You could pick any of these and it works that way, right? Why don't we do this kind of stuff? I think it's because we make too many excuses. Because exercising is hard. I think some of us say lines too like, I'm just not like that. I'm just not generous. Or I'm just not like that. I'm not a celebrator. Well, God says you should be. My mom wasn't a celebrator. My grandpa wasn't a celebrator. My great-grandmother was a celebrator. My great-great-grandfather wasn't a celebrator. I'm going to trace it all the way back to Adam and Eve. We weren't celebrators. Like that's an excuse. We're just not like that in my family. Well, you need to start. Every day, do something uncomfortable. Every day, do something hard. Just go down this list for a starting point. Every day, confess, forgive, give, celebrate. Make it a routine. Once a day for each. Confess, forgive, give, celebrate. Remind yourself of them every day. Have your family remind you of them. People are going to notice your heart is becoming healthy if you actually do these exercises. God's way is always better. Have you met people before where you meet them and you talk to them and you walk away and you go, man, there's just something healthy about that person. I don't see that very often. May we all strive to come out of our brokenness, which we all have. God loves us in our brokenness, and he has unlimited grace for our brokenness. But he also wants, as I said in the beginning, to go into the deepest, darkest places of our brokenness and make us whole. He wants to bring health where there's no health. And he wants to bring his way where we're not following it. And I'll be brutally honest with you, the longer that you've neglected your heart, the harder it is to do these exercises. Much like the physical world, the longer you've been out of shape, the harder it is to get back in. The spiritual world as well. If you've been living with guilt and hanging on to anger and clinging to bitterness or all these things we let into our heart for decades, it's hard to shake it. I talked to an individual last week for an hour, and she expressed to me how she's had anger built up inside her heart for 4 decades. And she's been walking around with it so long that she couldn't even tell me where it originally started or came from. She can't remember. That's how long she's been carrying it inside her heart. And I'm like, we got to do surgery. Because that's not the way you're meant to walk around this earth. That's not the way you're meant to live. I want you to be healthy in that area. Is your heart healthy? Is there any part during this message where you got a little bit of a cringe factor from what I said? That's probably the area you need to focus on. This is not a comfortable message. This is not an easy message. And if you felt some discomfort during this message, that's probably because the Holy Spirit is pointing some stuff out to you. It's a tough message. Talking about doing some heart surgery. You know, a lot of times we come into church and we just give Band-Aids. This is the root. That's why it's hard to talk about today. This is the root. Allow God to come into those tender, sensitive, I don't really want to know which ones they are places in my heart and do the hard work. The part that gives you pain, the part that maybe you cry about when nobody's looking sometimes. Maybe the part you're ashamed of, the part you've never shared with anybody. And when you do, and when you make this part of your routine, I guarantee you, you will experience what we call freedom. And for those of us who've learned to walk in it, or are still learning to walk in it, I should say, it's a kind of freedom that you never imagined possible, where it's not about a to-do list, it's not about checking off the right or wrong boxes, but it's about living from a place of freedom that Jesus offers you. And everything starts to flow out of a healthy heart. And maybe you're sitting here and going, I don't know what's clogging my heart. You know who does? Those closest to you. And I know you don't want to hear that because this is one of the hardest things some of you will ever do. But I started this a while ago, and it took me years to figure out that it's one of the healthiest things I could ever do. It's also one of the strongest things I could ever do, and I'll say it to the men as a man. You want to be the stronger man than you've ever been? Start doing what I'm about to tell you. Every single week, I ask my wife and one brother, do you see anything in my heart that needs to be adjusted? Every week, without fail. A brother that I trust and my wife. And I give them permission to speak it, and I promise them I'm not going to get upset, and I'm going to receive it, and I can get upset later when I'm by myself if I want. But I ask the question, and I take it. And I try to learn from it and grow from it and get my heart to a healthier place. Because those closest to you who know you, they know you better than you know yourself. And you're biased. And you're hurting sometimes. And you can't always see the unhealthy parts that need to get healthy. So I would challenge you with that this week. Don't do what the Bible calls foolish. Quit washing your hands and being concerned about what you say and your behavior all the time, because that really flows out of a changed heart. That's where your focus should start. Last verse. The band's going to come back up. Here's what happens when you allow God's power to take over and change your heart. 2 Corinthians 3. Wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, he gives freedom. And all of us have had that veil removed so we can be mirrors that brightly reflect the glory of the Lord. As the Spirit of the Lord works within us, we become more and more like him and reflect his glory even more. That's a right heart. That's a free heart. It's a heart that not a lot of people have. Here's the last thing. No doctor will ever force you to do what's good for your heart. It's the same with God. He will never force you to do the change that needs to happen in your heart. But he will tell you the way to do it. And he'll do what you can't do inside. Surrender to that. Surrender to the will of the master physician, the one who knows how to heal the deepest, darkest places. And you can have healing and freedom. Let me pray. God, sometimes when we sit in a quiet moment with nobody moving around, nobody speaking, when we're in the car, when we're at our house, when we're sleeping at night, there's really only two sounds that we can sometimes hear in the dead of silence. We can hear our breath coming and going from our lungs, and we can sometimes hear the beat of our very own heart. Father, may we acknowledge today that you give us the breath in our lungs, that you are the one that causes our heart to beat. And God, that you've also given us a spiritual heart, and that when we surrender ourselves to Jesus Christ, you do make our heart new. But that doesn't mean there's not work to still be done. It's not that you haven't given us the new heart, it's that we haven't learned to live with it yet. So God, help us to do that. Help us, as the weeks go on, to remember this message and to go into those unhealthy places in our heart and start to do the exercises to become healthy. And then I pray that you would do the impossible and change us from the inside out.